Our tiny rented room on Elm Street in 1995 always welcomed the morning sun through a thin, pale yellow curtain. The scent of day-old bread from the bakery down the block often mixed with the weak coffee I brewed in our little kitchenette. The blare of bus horns, the shouts of children playing on the sidewalk, and the hum of the radio broadcasting news about the Clinton administration drifted in through the slightly open window. It was a time when cell phones were still a luxury, and the internet was just beginning to take hold. We lived in an old neighborhood nestled between the upscale Highland Park and a struggling working-class area. A sharp contrast between lavish mansions and cramped rentals like the one we called home. Every morning I carried with me the truth of my story. A 26-year-old widow with a 6-year-old son and $550 in rent pressing on my shoulders, as I stepped out of that cozy but humble room to face the day ahead. My Jason was 6 years old, a beautiful child, who was the spitting image of his father. Jason had David's thoughtful brown eyes and that same determined chin. But more than his looks, he had inherited his father's kind spirit. Even at such a young age, he would share his meager snacks with other children at the daycare and offer his only toys to friends who came to visit. Sometimes watching him was like seeing David's soul living on, giving me both comfort and heartache simultaneously. Every morning, I would drop him off at Sunshine Daycare Center, which was 2 blocks from home. Martha, who lived nearby, always helped me by picking him up in the late afternoon. She only worked half days at the Anderson mansion, so she had time. The Thompson mansion was like something out of the movies. 3 bedrooms, huge living room with a view of the entire city, marble everywhere. On the first day, Elizabeth Thompson made it clear. "Sarah, I want everything impeccable. Richard receives many important people here." It was a lot of responsibility, but I needed that job so badly. The routine was grueling. I woke up at 5:30, carefully got Jason ready. He was small, but already understood our situation. "Mommy, I want to sleep more," he would sometimes say, and my heart would tighten. But I knew that at the daycare, he would have all his meals. It was a relief to know he would eat properly there. Breakfast, lunch, and afternoon snack. Sunshine Daycare Center was a blessing, you know. Public and full-time, it served many working mothers like me. I'd run to drop him off at the daycare at 7 o'clock, give him a kiss, a tight hug, and watch him go in, sometimes still sleepy. Then it was a rush. By 7:30 I was already in uniform at the Thompson house, on the other side of town. The uniform was a gray dress, with a white apron that Elizabeth insisted be always well ironed. She would look with that disgusted face if she saw a wrinkle out of place. "Sarah, presentation is everything," she would say, as if I didn't know the value of being well-dressed. You know, my dear, back then, everything was more difficult. The money I earned barely covered expenses. Every 15th of the month was the same agony to pay the rent to Mr. Jenkins, a short little old man who would knock on the door early in the morning, hat in hand, but with a severe look. I kept the money under the mattress, counting every penny. Every day was a struggle. I would wake up while it was still dark, heat water in a pot to bathe Jason. An electric shower was a luxury I couldn't afford. Breakfast was day-old bagels that I bought cheaper at the bakery at the end of the day. When we had peanut butter, it was a feast. Jason never complained. He only got sad when he saw the other children at the daycare with lunch boxes full of tasty treats. At the Thompson house, it was another world. The refrigerator was always full, food that they sometimes even threw away. It broke my heart thinking about my Jason. Elizabeth insisted that I eat only after her, never in the main kitchen. Everyone in their place, she would say with that stuck-up way of hers. Richard almost never showed up, but when he did, he brought that strong smell of expensive cologne and was always in a well-pressed suit. Martha, my mother-in-law, was my safe harbor. Poor thing. She also lived with difficulty, but she always found a way to help. Sometimes she would show up with a fruit for Jason. Other times she would save a small piece of meat that was left over from the Anderson house. She would say, "Sarah, a woman must be strong, especially when she has a child to raise." The worst was when Jason got sick. The health center was always packed, with lines starting at 4 in the morning to get a ticket. Medicine. Well, then I had to choose between buying medicine or paying the electricity bill. There were times I ended up owing the pharmacy run by Mr. Wilson, who was a good man and let me pay in small installments. In the Thompson mansion, the other maids would talk about their difficulties too. Tammy, who worked on the 8th floor, had 3 children to raise alone. Gloria, from apartment 105, sent money every month to her family in the Northeast, each one with their cross to bear. The work was hard. Cleaning that huge mansion wasn't easy. Elizabeth would run her finger over the furniture looking for dust, complain if she found a tiny spot on the mirror. The marble floor had to shine so much that you could see yourself reflected in it. My hands were always rough from so many cleaning products, but I couldn't use gloves. Elizabeth said they would damage the furniture. How silly. At night, when I finally got home, I still had to wash clothes in the yard's basin, which was shared with 3 other families. In winter it was a sacrifice. The cold water hurt my bones, but I had no choice. Jason was already asleep, poor thing, after doing his homework with Martha's help. On weekends, I would do extra cleaning in houses that Martha arranged for me. It was tiring, but every extra penny helped. I tried to save a little each month, but there was always an extra expense. A new notebook for Jason, medicine, a shoe that wore out. Ah, my dear, when David was alive, things were different. It wasn't easy, far from it, but it was better. You know, David was a good man, a worker. He was a bricklayer, woke up before sunrise and returned at nightfall, always with a smile on his face even though he was exhausted. How I met David was in a common way. I was 18 and worked as a clerk in a neighborhood bakery. David, at 22, was a bricklayer and always stopped by to buy bread before going to work. At first, he was just another customer, but gradually we began to exchange a few words. A smile. He always asked for an extra roll, said it was for his afternoon snack, but I suspected it was just an excuse to talk a little more. One day, he got up the courage and invited me for coffee after my shift. We talked for hours. It seemed like we had known each other for years. David had such a sweet way of speaking, so respectful. He told me about his dreams, of one day having his own construction company. After that, we began to see each other more frequently. David would wait for me to finish work at the bakery, sometimes accompany me home. Our relationship grew slowly, with respect and affection. At that time, we lived in a small town, Springfield, Ohio. I lived with my parents and my two younger brothers, Johnny and Tom, in a simple house near downtown. David lived on the other side of town with his mother, Martha, who was already a widow. When we decided to get married, we also decided it was time to seek new opportunities. David had heard there was more work for bricklayers here in the capital, so we made plans to move. It was a difficult decision, you know, leaving family, friends, everything we knew. But we had that youthful courage, that desire to build a life together. Martha, my mother-in-law, was an angel. When we told her about our moving plans, she said, "My children, I won't leave you alone in this." Initially, we moved and ended up living in a one-room apartment, as I've already told you. Sometime later, Martha managed to sell her little house to come live near us. With the money from the sale, she was able to buy a small house in the same city, thus being closer to support us. It was a difficult start. Everything new, everything unknown. But having Martha nearby was a great comfort. She helped us as she could, especially after Jason was born. Let me ask you something. How is your relationship with your mother-in-law? Write in the comments. I know there are many mothers-in-law that are only by God's grace, but I have nothing to complain about mine. Sometimes when homesickness hit hard, we would get together on Sunday, make a simple lunch, and reminisce about the times in Springfield. David would always say, "One day we'll go back there to visit, with our life already established here." He always had that faith in the future, you know? It's such a shame what happened to my husband. So young. He worked hard as a bricklayer, but always said, "Sarah, one day I'll have my own construction company. You'll see. We'll have our own house with a big yard for our boys to play in." He spoke with such conviction that I believed every word. David had that gift of making me believe everything was possible. David treated me like a queen. He always said, "Sarah, you're the most beautiful woman in this world." Even when I was all disheveled in old clothes, he made me feel special. On Sundays, we would go to the park, bring a blanket, sit on the grass. David played the guitar. We would sing. Jason would run around happily. They were simple moments, but so full of love. When he died in that terrible accident at the construction site, it was as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. There were days when I didn't know how I would carry on. But I looked at Jason, so small, and knew I had to be strong for him. Martha, what sadness. Her only son. She had already lost her husband a few years earlier. As she herself used to say about children, who has one has none. Only then did I understand that ugly phrase. Now, all I have left are these memories and the desire to honor his memory by raising Jason the best way I can. Sometimes I look at the sky and whisper, "David, I'm doing the best I can. I hope you're proud of us." Well, I had been working at the Thompson house for 8 months when things started to really fall apart. You know how it is, right? We keep going, balancing the bills as we can. But sometimes it seems like the world conspires against us, that God is testing our faith. It all started when Jason got sick. The winter that year was more severe than usual. My poor boy, leaving the warmth of his bed so early for the cold morning air. Even though I bundled him up so much that he could barely move his little arms with so many clothes, it didn't help. A strong flu caught him, the kind that leaves you feeling helpless. My Jason, always so strong, was there burning with fever, coughing as if he was going to cough his lungs out. His little eyes droopy in a way that broke my heart. I rushed to the health center, but it was chaotic. The line doubled around the block, full of people coughing and sneezing. I spent hours there, holding my son in my arms, praying to get medical attention. When it was finally our turn, the doctor didn't need much time to examine him. He looked at me with a serious face and said, "Mom, it's pneumonia." At that moment, I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. I immediately remembered my grandfather, who passed away because of this. The doctor prescribed some expensive medications, the kind where you look at the price and already feel the stab in your pocket. But what could I do? It was my son's health. I went to the pharmacy with my heart in my hand. When Mr. Wilson told me the price, I almost fell over. It was practically all the money I had saved for rent. I stood there looking at the medicines, at the money in my hand, thinking about my Jason at home with a fever. And of course, I ended up buying the medicines. The rent, I thought. I'll figure it out later. Martha stayed with Jason while I worked. I spent the whole week divided between working at the Thompson house and taking care of my sick son. I hardly slept, worried about the fever, the late rent, what I would put on the table. When the 15th came, the day to pay the rent, I didn't have it. Mr. Jenkins, the landlord, knocked on the door early. I explained the situation, asked for a few days. He didn't like it at all, but what choice did he have? I promised I would pay as soon as I could. I started working overtime at the Thompson house, arriving earlier, leaving later. Elizabeth even found my extra effort strange, but she didn't complain. Every extra penny was welcome, but it wasn't enough. I tried to borrow from my mother-in-law, but she said she was tight too. She gave me a small part. My youngest brother, Johnny, had just lost his job. The month turned, and I still hadn't managed to pay the rent. Mr. Jenkins started showing up every day, sometimes twice a day. "Mrs. Williams, I need that money. I have my bills too," he would say. And I understood, you know. But what could I do? The nights were the worst. Lying on that old bed, I would toss and turn, doing calculations in my head, praying a lot for God to heal my little Jason and to enlighten me with someone to help me with the money. I started skipping meals. I would tell Jason I wasn't hungry, that I had already eaten at the Thompson house. Sometimes it was true, sometimes not. Elizabeth would sometimes offer the lunch leftovers, and I would swallow my pride along with the food, all for my son. At work I tried to concentrate, but it was difficult. I would clean the windows in Thompson's living room, thinking about how to clear my name, iron Elizabeth's fine clothes, imagining what it would be like not to have to choose between food and medicine. The second month of late rent arrived, and with it, despair hit hard. Mr. Jenkins was no longer so understanding. He talked about eviction, about putting our things on the street. I begged, cried, promised I would find a way. It was during this time that I began to notice Congressman Thompson looking at me differently. It was no longer that employer-to-employee look. It was a different look. At first, I pretended not to notice, but as the days passed and the situation became more desperate, I began to wonder if there wasn't a way out there. One afternoon, while I was cleaning his office, Congressman Thompson came home early from work. He was alone. Elizabeth had gone to the beauty salon. He started making conversation, asked if everything was okay with me, said he had noticed I seemed worried lately. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the fatigue, the desperation, but I ended up telling him everything about Jason being sick, the late rent, the bills piling up. I cried right there in front of him, holding a duster in one hand and a cleaning cloth in the other. Richard listened in silence. Then, with a calm voice, said he could help me, that he had a way to solve my problem, but that of course he would need something in return. When he said that, I felt my stomach sink. I knew exactly what he meant. I stood there not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to run away. Another part thought about Jason, about Mr. Jenkins threatening to put us on the street, about the bills piling up. Richard must have noticed my hesitation. He said I didn't need to decide at that moment, that I could think about it and give an answer later. I left work that day with my head spinning. I walked the streets without even paying attention to where I was going. When I came to my senses, I was sitting on a park bench staring at nothing. I thought about David, what he would say if he were alive. I thought about my mother, the lessons she taught me about dignity and self-respect. But I also thought about Jason, my boy who wasn't to blame for any of this, who deserved a roof over his head, food on the table, a decent life. I thought about all the mothers in the world and what they would do for their children. That night I didn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling, thinking about all the choices that had led me there, the dreams I had when I was young, the promises I made to David, the future I imagined for Jason. And I asked myself how far I would go to protect my child. What would be the price of our survival? When the sun rose, I still didn't have an answer. But I knew that whatever my decision, nothing would be the same again. That morning, I got ready as if it were a normal day. I gave Jason breakfast, left him at the daycare, and went to work. Thank God the boss wasn't there. It was then that an idea came to me. It was risky, I knew, but what choice did I have? During my lunch hour, I ran to the bank. My name was tarnished, I knew, but I had to try. I arrived there all awkward, my heart beating fast. I asked to speak with the manager, Mr. Harrison. He knew me by sight from the times I went there to deposit my salary. When I entered his office, my legs were shaking. He looked at me over his glasses with that face of someone who already knew what I was going to ask. "Mr. Harrison," I began, my voice almost failing. "I know my name is tarnished. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I'm desperate." I told him everything about Jason being sick, the late rent, the bills piling up. I spoke of my daily struggle, the overtime, of how I was doing everything to stay honest. "I just need a chance," I said, already with tears in my eyes. "A small loan, just so I can breathe. I promise I'll pay, even if I have to work day and night." Mr. Harrison listened to me in silence, then let out a heavy sigh. "Mrs. Williams," he says, "I understand your situation, but the bank has rules." At that point, I lost my composure. I started crying right there in front of him. "Please," I begged. "I don't know what else to do. I can't lose my roof. I can't let my son go without necessities." Mr. Harrison became visibly uncomfortable. He shuffled some papers on his desk, cleared his throat, and then said, "Look, I can't promise anything, but I'll see what I can do. I'll analyze your case carefully." I left the bank with a mixture of hope and fear. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a chance, as small as it might be. I returned to work with my head racing. While cleaning the Thompson house, I kept thinking about what I would do if the bank denied the loan. Richard's proposal returned to my mind, tormenting me. That night, lying in bed looking at Jason sleeping, I found myself praying for a miracle, for a light at the end of the tunnel, praying not to have to do something I would regret for the rest of my life. The days that followed were pure agony. Meanwhile, Richard continued to look at me in a different way. I could feel his eyes following me around the house. He hadn't repeated the offer, but it was there, implicit, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. After so much thinking, an idea came to me. What if I asked Elizabeth for help? She's a woman. Maybe she would understand my situation. I decided I would talk to her when Richard wasn't home. The next day, I waited for Richard to leave for work and built up courage. With my heart in my mouth, I knocked on Elizabeth's bedroom door. "Come in," she said in that thin voice. I entered, wringing my hands on my apron. Elizabeth was sitting at her vanity, applying red lipstick. Mrs. Thompson, I began. Excuse me for bothering you, but I really needed to talk to you. She looked at me through the mirror, raising an eyebrow. What is it, Sarah? Some problem with the cleaning? No, ma'am. It's that... I took a deep breath. I'm going through a very difficult situation. I didn't even finish speaking before she cut me off. Oh, no. If you're asking for a raise, forget it. I already pay you more than the other maids in the building. It's not that, Mrs. Thompson. It's that my son is sick. I have bills overdue and... Look here, Sarah, she said, turning to me with a face of few friends. Your personal problems are not my concern. If you can't manage, the problem is yours. There are plenty of people who want your job, you know? I felt my eyes filling with tears. But, Mrs. Thompson, I just need some help. A loan, perhaps? Enough! She banged her hand on the vanity. I'm not a bank or social assistance. If you're not satisfied, the door is the servant's exit. Now go back to your work, and don't bother me anymore with these silly things. I left there crushed, feeling smaller than an ant. Women can be so cruel, you know. Maybe it was because she didn't have children. I don't know what to say about her. That's when it hit me. I had nowhere else to turn. Richard's proposal was indeed my only way out. As painful as it was. As dirty as I would feel just thinking about it. What choice did I have? I went back to the kitchen, decided. I would do what had to be done. Not for me, but for Jason. He didn't ask to be born, didn't ask to be left without a father. He deserved a better life, and if this was the price I had to pay, then so be it. That day I went to work as if nothing had happened. I cleaned, ironed, cooked, but my head was far away. When Richard came home from work, I felt my heart race. I waited for him to settle in, take a shower, have lunch. Only afterward, when I had the opportunity, did I build up courage. I knocked on the door of his office. "Come in," he said. I entered with shaky legs, sweaty hands. "Richard," I began, my voice trembling. I thought about your proposal." He raised his eyes from the papers he was reading. He looked at me in a way that gave me chills. "And so, Sarah, what's your answer?" I swallowed hard. "I accept," I said, almost in a whisper. Richard smiled in a way that made me sick, but I couldn't go back now. He got up, came to me. "Great, Sarah. You won't regret it." We arranged everything right there. It would be the following Saturday. Elizabeth was going to travel to see her mother in the countryside. The apartment would be empty. "Come at 8 at night," he said. I'll be waiting for you." I left there feeling dirty even before I had done anything. I went to the bathroom and cried softly, so no one would hear. But there was no turning back. It was either this or the street. The next day I went to talk to Martha. Poor thing, always willing to help. "Martha," I said, "I need a favor. Saturday night an extra cleaning job came up for me. Can you stay with Jason?" She didn't even hesitate. "Of course, my daughter. I'll take care of my little Jason." The lie hurt me. But what could I do? Tell the truth? Never. I would prefer death. Martha, my mother-in-law, God bless her, was always an angel in my life. Martha had her own unique way of showing kindness, sometimes through small gestures like saving a bit of food from the Anderson house, other times through her unwavering emotional support. Unlike many mother-in-law relationships that I had heard about, ours was built on mutual respect and genuine care. She never judged my decisions, even when I made mistakes. Since David passed away, she never left me and Jason. I remember as if it were yesterday, her arriving at the funeral, hugging me tight and saying, "My daughter, now it's just the three of us in this world." Martha even suggested that Jason and I move to a better room in her house, giving us more space. "Sarah," she would say, "why pay rent? My house is small, but it fits the three of us. Jason would have more space to play. I could take care of him while you work." The offer was tempting, I won't lie. To end the worry of rent, to have someone to help me with Jason. But something inside me wouldn't let me. It wasn't pride, you know. It was more complicated than that. Every time I looked at Martha, I saw David. The same eyes, the same way of smiling to the side, and that hurt. It hurt because it reminded me of what I had lost, of the future we had planned, and that now would never happen. And there's more. As much as Martha treated me like a daughter, I knew I was no longer that. The bond that united us, David, was no longer there. I felt like an intruder, you know, as if I were taking advantage of her kindness. "Martha," I would say, "you already do too much for us. I can't accept more than this." She would insist, "But Sarah, you are family. David may be gone, but you continue to be my daughter-in-law. My daughter." These words tightened my heart because deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I was no longer her daughter-in-law. I was just the mother of her grandson. So I continued in my little rented corner, accepting her help with Jason, but keeping that distance. not for lack of gratitude, but because I didn't feel entitled to ask for more. When Saturday arrived, I was a wreck. I spent the whole day with a knot in my stomach. I bathed Jason, prepared a small bag with his things, and took him to Martha's house. "Mommy will be back soon, okay, my love?" I said, giving him a kiss on the forehead. Jason pouted. He didn't want me to go. I almost weakened right there. "Go with God, my daughter," Martha said. "May Our Lady protect you." I left there feeling the weight of those words. "Forgive me, Martha," I thought. "Forgive me, Jason." I went back home, took a long shower, scrubbed my entire body as if I could clean what I was about to do. I got ready without much enthusiasm. I didn't want to feel pretty, didn't want to like what was going to happen. At 8 o'clock sharp, I was at the door of the Thompson mansion. I rang the bell with my heart in my mouth. Richard opened the door, all smiling. He was in a robe, smelling of expensive cologne. "Come in, Sarah," he said. "Would you like something to drink?" I shook my head. I couldn't speak. He led me to the living room, poured himself a whiskey. "Are you sure you don't want any?" he asked again. I shook my head no. We stayed there in an awkward silence. I looked at the floor, the ceiling, the walls, anywhere but at him. Richard drank all his whiskey in one go, then approached me. "Let's go to the bedroom," he said, taking my hand. I let him lead me. Each step felt like I was carrying a ton. We entered the bedroom. He turned on only the bedside lamp. The dim light made everything seem even more intimate. "Relax, Sarah," he said, coming close. "It will be good. You'll see." I closed my eyes when he kissed me. I tried to think of something else, anything, but I couldn't. I only thought about Jason, about David, up in heaven, looking at me with disappointment, about my mother, who had taught me to be a righteous woman. It seemed quick in my mind, thank God. Though in reality it might have taken hours, I can't really say. To me, it felt like an eternity. When it was over, Richard went to the bathroom. I lay there, feeling like the worst of women. He came back, opened the drawer of the nightstand, took out an envelope, and handed it to me. "It's all there," he said. "It should resolve your problems." I took the envelope without looking inside. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I dressed in a hurry, didn't even look at myself in the mirror. I didn't want to see what I had become. "See you on Monday," he said as I was leaving, as if nothing had happened. I left the building running. I walked the streets aimlessly, crying softly. I only stopped when I reached a small plaza. I sat on a bench and opened the envelope. There was more money than I had ever seen in my life, enough to pay the overdue rent and have some left over. I sat there, looking at the wads of bills, feeling a mixture of relief and disgust. Relief, because now I could pay Mr. Jenkins, buy proper food for Jason, maybe even save a little. Disgust because, well, you know why. On Sunday morning, I went early to Mr. Jenkins' house. I paid all the overdue rent. He was surprised but didn't ask any questions. He just thanked me and said he was happy that I had resolved my situation. Afterward, I made a special lunch for Jason, something I hadn't done for a long time. Seeing him eat with gusto, smiling, telling stories about the games he had played with his grandmother, I thought it was worth it. It had to be worth it. I kept thinking about how I was going to look at Richard on Monday, how I was going to bear working there knowing what had happened, and if Elizabeth found out, and if someone else knew. The doorman saw and pretended not to see. Fear was taking hold of me. What I had done couldn't be undone. Now it was about living with this heavy secret, with this guilt. My God, how I wished that Monday had never come. I woke up with an upset stomach, shaking hands. I had to force the coffee down my throat so as not to faint on the way to work. When I arrived at the Thompson mansion, I felt as if I were entering a minefield. Every corner of the house reminded me of what had happened on Saturday. I started cleaning, trying not to think, focusing only on the movement of the broom, the smell of disinfectant. It was then that I heard the office door open. Richard came out adjusting his tie. When he saw me, he gave that eager smile. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, coming close, too close. Good morning, Congressman," I stuttered, taking a step back. But it didn't help. In a second he was there, pinning me against the wall. I felt his breath on my neck, his large hands holding my arms. "I enjoyed our Saturday," he whispered. "How about we repeat it?" At that moment, I felt my world collapse. He thought that was going to become routine, that I had become what? His mistress? His private prostitute? "Congressman, please," I begged, trying to break free. "That was just once. I needed the money." But he squeezed harder. "Come on, Sarah. Don't play hard to get. We both know you liked it." At that moment, something inside me exploded. I gathered all the strength I had and pushed him away. "No!" I shouted. Never again, do you understand me? Never again. Richard stood there looking at me with a mixture of surprise and anger. Without saying anything, he grabbed his briefcase and left, slamming the door. I collapsed on the floor, crying. It was then that I realized I couldn't work there anymore. I had to find another job, and fast. That same afternoon, I spoke with Martha. I didn't tell her the real reason, of course. I just said I was looking for something better. "Oh, my daughter," she said. "Let me talk to Mrs. Anderson, her employer. She knows a lot of good people from high society. Maybe something will come up for you." 2 days later, Martha called me, all excited. She had secured an interview for me at the Williams house, a rich family from the upscale neighborhood. I went for the interview, trembling with nervousness, but everything went well. Mrs. Williams, the lady of the house, liked me and said I could start the following week. I returned to the Thompson house to give my notice, but when I told Richard I was leaving, he turned red with anger. "You're not going anywhere," he shouted. "Who do you think you are?" I tried to explain, to say that I had already found another job, but he wouldn't listen. "If you leave, I'll tell everyone what you did," he threatened. "I'll tell your mother-in-law that her daughter-in-law is a tramp." Elizabeth was still at her mother's house in the countryside. I left there crying, but determined. The next day was my last day. I went to work with my heart in my hand, praying that Richard wouldn't do anything crazy. But as I was leaving, he appeared at the door with the face of someone who had been drinking. "You stole from me!" he shouted. "Where's the Tiffany diamond necklace?" I was baffled. What necklace? What was he talking about? "Congressman, I didn't take anything. I swear to God." But he wouldn't listen. He called the doorman, said I had stolen. When the police arrived, he demanded they search my bag, and there it was, the cursed necklace. I had never seen that thing in my life, not even around the lady's neck. But there it was in my bag. "I didn't put this here," I shouted desperately. "Someone put this in my bag. I'm being framed." But no one would listen to me. I was handcuffed right there in front of everyone in the building. I saw the look of satisfaction on Richard's face as they took me away to the police station. It was a nightmare. They treated me like garbage. "Thieving maid," they said. I spent a week in a filthy cell before the custody hearing. The judge didn't even want to hear my version. "Qualified theft," he said. "Sentence of 4 to 10 years. My God, up to 10 years. How could this be happening? Tell me, have you ever been accused of something without being guilty? We see it all the time in soap operas, but when it happens in real life, to you or someone you know, it's totally different." Only those who go through this injustice know how to explain it. The worst was when Martha came to visit me in jail. She brought Jason. Seeing my son there on the other side of the bars nearly killed me. "Mommy, why are you in there?" he asked, his little eyes filled with tears. What could I say? How to explain to a child that his mother was in prison for a crime she didn't commit? I swallowed my tears and tried to smile. "My love, Mommy is solving some things here. It's going to take a little while, but soon I'll be back home. Okay?" Jason didn't seem very convinced. He looked at Martha, then at me, then at the bars. You could see he was confused, scared. "But I want to go with you now," he whimpered. I felt my heart break into pieces. Martha, with tears in her eyes, looked at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment before bending down to talk to Jason. "My grandson, Mommy can't leave right now. You're going to stay with me for a while, okay? We'll take care of the house for when she returns." When they left, I collapsed. That night, lying on the hard cell mattress, I cried until I had no more tears. I thought about everything that had happened, how I had ended up there. All I wanted was to give my son a better life. And now I was there, imprisoned, humiliated, far from him. It served me right. My punishment came swiftly for sleeping with a married man for money. Now I would have to bear the consequences. The days in jail were a real hell. Each minute seemed like an eternity. The constant noise, the smell of mold and disinfectant, the food that was barely edible, all of this was difficult. But the worst was the other inmates. Right from the first day, I realized that in there existed a separate world with its own rules and hierarchies. There was everything from shoplifters to dangerous murderers. Many were women like me, poor, uneducated, who had done something stupid out of desperation. Others were hardcore, with cold eyes that gave me chills. The veterans soon came wanting to know my story. When I told them I was a domestic worker accused of stealing from my employers, some laughed. Others spat on the ground. "Another fool who fell for the rich folks' tricks," said one. "I bet the boss was hitting on you, and the wife covered for him," said another. I tried to explain, to say I was innocent, that it was a setup. But who would believe me? It was my word against that of a rich and powerful congressman. In there, my story was just one more, among so many others of injustice and inequality. The nights were the worst. The noise never stopped completely. There was always someone crying, someone screaming, someone having nightmares. I would lie on the bunk, looking at the peeling ceiling, thinking about Jason, about the life I had left behind. There were days I woke up with my face all swollen from crying so much during the night. The other inmates sometimes mocked, sometimes tried to console me in their way. "Stop crying, woman. In here, that doesn't help anything. We've been forgotten here," they would say. But how could I stop? How could I accept that situation? I was innocent, damn it. I shouldn't be there. The worst was when doubt came. Did anyone out there believe me? Would Jason grow up thinking his mother was a thief? Did Martha, deep down, think I had really stolen, since a few days earlier I had shown up with money and paying everything I owed? It was entirely possible she thought I had indeed stolen. I tried to talk to the public defender, explain my situation, but he barely looked at me. "Look, Mrs. Williams, I understand that you say you're innocent, but without evidence, it's difficult. It's your word against the congressman's, and we know how justice works in this country. Right." I left that room feeling smaller than an ant. That was it. I was going to spend years in prison for a crime I didn't commit, just because I was poor. And Richard was rich. 10 months. 10 long months I spent in that hell. Each day was an eternity. Each night a nightmare. In the beginning, Martha would come to visit me, sometimes bringing Jason. Seeing my son growing up far from me, without being able to hug him, to care for him, was a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. During one of these visits, I couldn't take it anymore. There I was behind bars, and I said to Martha, "Please don't come anymore. Don't bring Jason. I can't bear this suffering." She looked at me with those sad eyes full of pity and nodded. By then, I had been in prison for about 6 months. Then, on a day like any other, something happened that I never expected. They called me to the cell, saying I was free, that someone had paid my bail. I didn't understand. Who would pay bail for me? Was it Martha? But where would she get money for that? When I walked out of the prison gates, I almost fell over backward. There she was, Elizabeth Thompson, standing next to her imported car. My heart froze. What was she doing there? Was it another setup? She came toward me, telling me to get in the car, that we needed to talk. But I was afraid. What if it really was a trap? I said no thanks, that I preferred to walk. But Elizabeth didn't give up. She started walking beside me, talking non-stop. She said she had filed for divorce from Richard, that she had discovered everything, the lies, the betrayals. She said he frequented the red light district, especially in Washington, D.C., that he was with a lot of prostitutes. I kept walking, but my head was spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. What was happening? Why was she telling me all this? Then she said the thing I least expected. She said she had withdrawn the complaint, that she had realized I was innocent. She asked for forgiveness, and then told me the truth about the necklace. Elizabeth began to speak, her voice trembling a little. She told me that the necklace, the one I supposedly stole, wasn't even hers. She said she discovered that Richard had bought it to give to a mistress. It seems she found the necklace before traveling to her mother's house, but stayed quiet, thinking he was going to surprise her. Then, when Richard realized she was suspicious, he invented this whole story about theft and put the blame on me. It was a way for him to not have to give the necklace to her. Understand? After the police returned the necklace, he said he wouldn't give it to Elizabeth, said it was bad luck, that he would exchange it at the store for another piece of jewelry. But then, sometime later, she caught him red-handed. She saw Richard in a restaurant with his mistress, and the woman was wearing the necklace. That's how she discovered the whole truth. I was shocked. So that was it. Richard had used me twice. First, to satisfy his desires, then as a scapegoat to hide his betrayal. Elizabeth continued, "Forgive me, Sarah. I should have been suspicious, should have investigated better, but I was blind. I didn't want to see the truth about Richard." I stopped walking and looked at her. Elizabeth, always so well-groomed, so nose in the air, now seemed smaller, older, more human. I asked why she had done this, why she had gotten me out of jail. She replied that it was because she was wrong, and because it was the right thing to do, that she couldn't let an innocent person pay for her husband's mistakes. I remained silent. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream the truth, to tell everything that Richard had done to me. But the fear of complicating things even more, of somehow going back to jail, was greater. So I kept quiet. Elizabeth insisted on taking me to Martha's house. I ended up accepting after all. I didn't even have bus fare. I would have to walk for several kilometers. In the car, she continued talking. She told me that she hadn't always been rich, that she was born poor like me. But then she met Richard, got married, and the money went to her head. She thought she was above everyone, that her husband would never betray her. As she spoke, I kept thinking about how life comes full circle. There was Elizabeth, the boss I so feared, telling me the most intimate and sad parts of her life. She said she went to the salon almost every day, spent fortunes on clothes and designer jewelry. All for what? For him to be with other women right under her nose. You could feel the bitterness in her voice. When we arrived at Martha's house, it was already evening. I saw my son playing in the yard. My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. 10 months. 10 months away from my boy. Elizabeth told me to go, to hug my son. I thanked her, got out of the car without looking back. Jason, when he saw me, dropped his toys and came running. "Mommy! Mommy's back!" he shouted. I hugged my son with all my strength, tears flowing down my face. Martha appeared at the door, her eyes wide with surprise. She must have thought she was seeing a ghost. With my son in my arms, I knew that no matter how difficult it was, I had to start over. For Jason, for myself. Life had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. But it wasn't easy, you know. The first days were strange. Jason wouldn't unstick from me, as if afraid I would disappear again. Martha kept looking at me in a funny way, as if she didn't know whether to believe in my innocence or not. And then there were the neighbors, the looks, the whispers. Ex-convict, thief, they said softly when I passed by. There were people who crossed the street to avoid having to talk to me. Finding a job. Well, I won't even tell you. Nobody wanted to give work to a woman who had been imprisoned for theft. It didn't matter that I had been cleared. The stigma was there. Martha helped me as she could. I stayed living with them in her house. Almost a week after I had gotten out of jail, I saw Elizabeth's big car stopping in front of Martha's house. My heart raced. What was she doing there? Elizabeth entered, looking around as if she had never seen a simple house before. But what surprised me was how she seemed to make herself comfortable there on Martha's old sofa. I was alone at home at that time, and I confess I was a little afraid of what she might want. "Sarah," she began, adjusting that expensive purse on her lap. "I came here to talk to you about something important." I swallowed hard, expecting the worst. But what she said next left me speechless. "The lawyer has filed a request for compensation for you," she said. "Richard, I mean, he's a public figure. What he did, putting you in jail unjustly, is very serious. You lost 10 months of your life, Sarah. That has no price." I stood there trying to understand what was happening. Compensation for me? Elizabeth continued explaining. She said that because of Richard's position, and the time I spent in prison without reason, the compensation would be high. She mentioned numbers I had never even dreamed of. "We're talking about a compensation of $500,000, Sarah," she said, and I almost fell over backward. 500,000 was more money than I would earn in my entire life, working as a domestic worker. At that time, this was a fortune. She explained that the money would be paid in installments, so as not to attract too much attention. It would be 10 installments of $50,000 each, but I could access the first payment immediately. Just imagine me receiving $50,000 each time. It was enough to buy a house, give my son a good life, maybe even open my own business. But Elizabeth warned, "You need to be careful. Inflation is high. Money loses value quickly. It will be important for you to think carefully about what to do with this money." At first, I was too excited. It was as if all my problems had been solved at once. I started making plans, dreaming of a better life for me, for Jason and for Martha. I thought of all the things we always wanted to have. A new refrigerator, a decent stove, maybe even a flat-screen TV. But then, as Elizabeth talked about how I should use the money carefully, be discreet and all, a strange feeling started to hit me. Guilt, you know? I remembered that night a few months ago when Richard made me that disgusting proposal, and I accepted. My conscience began to weigh. There was Elizabeth, helping me, doing everything to compensate me for an injustice, and I keeping that dirty secret. I was silent for a while, struggling with myself. Part of me wanted to take the money and pretend nothing had happened. After all, I had suffered a lot. Right? I deserved this compensation. But another part knew it wasn't right, that I had also done something wrong. With great effort, I found courage. "Elizabeth," I began, my voice trembling. "I need to tell you something." She looked at me curiously. "Go ahead, Sarah." "It's about Richard," I started, feeling my heart beat so hard I thought it would come out of my mouth. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a second, and let it all out at once. "I spent a night with him. It was when you were traveling." Elizabeth's face changed immediately. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger, but also with pain. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat close up, but I continued. Now that I had started, I needed to go all the way. It was before all this happened. I was desperate, Elizabeth. Without a penny. With the rent 2 months late. Jason needing medicine. I went to ask for your help, remember? But you wouldn't even listen to me. Then Richard. he made the proposal and God forgive me, I accepted. Elizabeth stood up from the sofa as if she had received a shock. She began to pace back and forth in that small living room, her hands trembling. You could see she was furious, but also hurt, betrayed. I continued talking, the words flowing like water from a dam that had burst. When I returned to work, you were still traveling. Richard, he wanted to be with me again, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. I felt dirty, used. I said no, started looking for another job. When I presented my resignation, he went crazy with anger. That's when he accused me of the theft. "Why are you telling me this now, Sarah?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You could have stayed quiet, taken the money and gone away. Why?" I lowered my head, feeling the tears I had been holding back finally fall. "Because I can't take any more lies," I said, my voice coming out almost in a whisper. "I spent months in jail because of a lie. I lost practically a year of my son's life. I don't want to start a new life carrying another lie. I can't. I would take this secret to my grave. But you come back here talking about compensation. I don't deserve this money." We sat in silence for a while, me on the sofa crying softly, feeling like the worst person in the world. Elizabeth standing by the window, looking outside as if searching for answers in the sky. After what seemed like a lifetime, she spoke, her voice tired. "I remember that day, Sarah. You came to my room to ask for help. I didn't even listen to you." She paused a bit, as if thinking about what to say. "I won't lie. This changes a lot of things. I'm going to need some time to think about what to do, to understand all of this." I nodded without being able to look at her. At that moment, I didn't know if I had done the right thing by telling everything. But I knew that for the first time in a long time, I felt light, as if I had taken an enormous weight off my shoulders. She sighed. "The compensation is still yours by right. What happened between you and my husband doesn't change the fact that you were unjustly imprisoned. But I don't know if I can continue to help you personally after this." I nodded, understanding. It was more than I deserved, in truth. Elizabeth grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. Before leaving, she turned to me. "Thank you for being honest, Sarah," she said. "It doesn't change the past, but at least now I know the whole truth." And with that she left, leaving me there alone with my thoughts. Life continued after that day. I never saw Elizabeth again for almost a month, when a lawyer in a well-pressed suit and leather briefcase knocked on our door. With a polite but not very emotional smile, he explained to me that the compensation paperwork was in order. However, his next words were like a bucket of cold water. The process could take more than a year to be completed. A year seemed like an eternity for someone who had already lost so much time behind bars. In the meantime, my dear, as I've said before, it wasn't easy to find a job. Nobody wanted to give work to an ex-prisoner woman, even if she was innocent. Then I had an idea. I went to the wardrobe. There, among the mothballs and memories, were our clothes. Some no longer fit us. Others were just a reminder of times that wouldn't return. I separated some pieces. I remembered a church far from home, St. Mary's Episcopal Church in the fancy neighborhood of my ex-employers. They always had charity bazaars there. I talked with Martha and convinced her. Then she gave me all her hard-earned money that she kept for emergencies, and I went. I confess I didn't have the courage to tell the truth. I said I hadn't kept in touch because I was working too hard to grow the store. They were all proud, thinking I had gotten rich just through my hard work. If they only knew. Martha, my guardian angel, stayed quiet. She was my accomplice in this whole story. Speaking of Martha, she also visited her old house, her friends. Poor thing. It hit her with sadness there where our David was born and grew up. Her husband, too. It brought back many memories and longing. It was heartbreaking. I took advantage to help my parents financially. I bought some new furniture, paid some overdue bills. It was the least I could do after so long without giving news. Before leaving, I invited them to spend Christmas at my house. Everything was arranged. I left there with a full heart, you know. Happy to have seen my parents again, to be able to help them, but also with a weight on my conscience for not telling the whole truth. Well, my dear, time really doesn't stop, does it? 2 years passed, and love knocked on my door again. Michael entered my life like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. Owner of Michael's Fresh Market, separated and without children, he had that calm way that calmed my still so wounded heart. It was a mutual friend who introduced us. Poor Michael also had his sad story. His ex-wife had cheated and left with another man. We understood each other right away, you know. Two wounded souls who found comfort in each other. But you know how it is, right? Life is never simple. I thought I was going to have a problem. But in the end, I didn't. Martha lived with us, and in a way I was still like a daughter-in-law to her. I was afraid of hurting her by bringing another man into the house. I built up courage and went to talk to her. I said that if it bothered her, I wouldn't bring Michael to live with us. After all, she was like a mother to me. And you know what she said to me? It surprised me completely. "Sarah," she said with that sweet way of hers, "it's good that you're happy. You're young. You need to move forward. David, may God have him, would want you to rebuild your life." I was speechless. You know, that woman's kindness had no limits. That's how Michael came to live with us. And look, it was better than I could have imagined. He and Martha got along very well. Sometimes I would come home and find the two playing dominoes on the porch, laughing like two old friends. He had lost his mother in adolescence, and with the coexistence, he began to say that Martha was like a second mom to him. Time passed and our family grew. We had 2 more children. Imagine that. Jason gained 2 little siblings to take care of. Little Ethan and sweet Emily, who received her name in honor of Michael's mother. Seeing my boy, already a young man, helping to take care of the little ones. My heart would fill with joy watching the 3 together. The stores also prospered. Today, I have 4 clothing stores. I no longer need to be there all the time. I have my trusted employees who take care of everything. I just go occasionally to check things out. You know how it is. And time doesn't stop running, does it? Today, at 67 years of age, I'm already a grandmother and great-grandmother. My great-grandchildren are the joy of the house. Seeing Jason, my firstborn, holding his son in his arms, sometimes I still find myself crying with emotion. You know. When I look back on my journey, sometimes I still can't believe it. From a poor single mother, wrongfully imprisoned, to now, a successful entrepreneur with a loving family. Life has taught me that no darkness lasts forever. My dear friend, I wonder, have you ever faced a moment that felt impossible to overcome? How did you find the strength to keep going? Sometimes we fall not to fail, but to learn how to rise stronger. Share your story below, because who knows, it might become a light for someone else in their darkest moment. If my story has touched your heart, join me each week as we explore more life lessons together. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story.